Welcome. Following the success of the Civil Rights Movement on gaining the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, other ethnic groups took notice and started movements of their own. This video assignment addresses what I call the splintered civil rights movement, and it includes the feminist movement, the Hispanic movement, the American Indian movement, and the gay and lesbian movement. We'll begin with the feminist movement. The aim of feminism was a challenge to the conventional cult of female domesticity that had prevailed since the 1950s. Think of June Cleaver from Leave It to Beaver, and you get the idea. Vacuuming in your pearls. Betty Friedan led the mainstream of the women's movement. In 1957, Friedan, then a housewife herself, conducted a poll of Smith College women and found that many of the suburban housewives were miserable. Her book, called The Feminine Mystique, published in 1963, stated that women had actually lost ground in the workplace after World War II, and that there was a propaganda campaign engineered by advertisers in women's magazines to foster what she called the feminine mystique of blissful domesticity. In Friedan's view, the middle-class home had become a comfortable concentration camp, where women suffocated and stagnated in an atmosphere of mindless materialism, daytime television, and neighborhood gossip. Then Friedan discovered that many women worked outside the home as well, who were frustrated by the demands of holding 2 full-time jobs instead of 1, underpaid clerical workers, and unpaid housekeeper. In 1966, Friedan helped found the National Organization for Women, also known as NOW. NOW sought to end discrimination in the workplace on the basis of gender and went on to spearhead efforts to legalize abortion and obtain federal and state support for child care centers. In the early 1970s, NOW advanced the cause of gender equality. Under Title IX of the Education Amendments in 1972, colleges were required to institute affirmative action programs to ensure equal opportunities for women. As a result of this, 40 years later, more women were on the USA Olympic team that went to London in 2012 than men. Also in 1972, Congress overwhelmingly approved an Equal Rights Amendment, known as ERA, to the federal Constitution, which guaranteed that equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. The proposed amendment had been bottlenecked for Congress in years. It was originally introduced in 1923. Until the late 1960s, the main support base of the ERA was wealthy, conservative women. The Republican Party included it as a plank in their platform from 1940 to 1980. Most New Dealers opposed the ERA, contending that provided government protection for women in the workplace would diminish the power of labor unions. In the 1960s, Eleanor Roosevelt endorsed ERA as the chair of President Kennedy's Commission on the Status of Women. In 1969, Representative Shirley Chisholm of New York delivered her Equal Rights for Women speech in Congress. Chisholm was the first African American woman elected to Congress. At the time, one feminist said, "If the 1960s belonged to blacks, then the next 10 years are ours." But sharp disputes between moderate and radical feminists had fragmented the women's movement. The movement failed to broaden its appeal outside the middle class. ERA, which had seemed to be a slam dunk for ratification once it escaped Congress. After all, the nation had approved prohibition. It stymied in state legislatures. By 1982, the amendment expired, several states short of the 36 needed for ratification. On January 22, 1973, the Supreme Court struck down state laws forbidding abortions in the first 3 months of pregnancy, in the case Roe v. Wade. This case originated in Dallas, as friends of Norma L. McCorvey advised her to assert falsely that she had been raped in order to obtain a legal abortion in the state of Texas. The scheme failed because there was no police report documenting the alleged rape. McCorvey then attempted to obtain an illegal abortion, but found that the police had shut out the unauthorized site. In 1970, attorneys Linda Coffey and Sarah Weddington filed suit on behalf of McCorvey, who was given the alias Jane Roe. The defendant in the case is Dallas County District Attorney Henry Wade. He represented the state. The district court ruled in McCrory's favor on the basis of the Ninth Amendment and precedent from the Supreme Court case Griswold v. Connecticut, which stated that the Constitution protected a right to marital privacy. And after Texas appealed the case, it made its way to the Supreme Court. Since the court's decision, attempts to liberate liberal, local, and state abortion laws generated a powerful backlash among Roman Catholic and fundamentalist Protestant voters, who launched a Right to Life campaign in the 1980s. Now for the Chicano movement. Hispanics also worked to promote economic and social justice. Like African Americans, World War II served to heighten a sense of American identity among Hispanic Americans and excite their desire for equal rights. After World War II, Hispanic Americans still face widespread discrimination in hiring, housing, and education. Thus, Hispanic American activists began to mirror African American activists in the 1950s. They also denounced segregation, promoted efforts to improve the quality of public education, and struggled to increase political influence and economic opportunities. One of the initiatives was to use the term Chicano as an inclusive label for all Mexican immigrants, Spanish Americans in the old Mexican Cession, and Tejanos. Originally, Chicano was Mexican slang for a clumsy person, but now the term took on a new meaning as a positive label. In Southern California, members of the Young Citizens for Community Action reformed as the Young Chicanos for Community Action, or the Brown Berets. They promoted greater self-reliance and local involvement in Mexican-American neighborhoods and demanded improvement in neighborhood schools. The United Farm Workers was charged with the job of representing Mexican-American migrant workers. Leading the UFW was the charismatic Cesar Chavez, who was born to Mexican immigrants living in Arizona. The UFW gained national attention when it joined a strike by Filipino farm workers against corporate grape growers in the San Joaquin Valley. Under Chavez's leadership, the strike drew national attention and popular support. Like Dr. Martin Luther King, Chavez employed nonviolent tactics, especially the fast, or refusing to eat. It has been suggested that Chavez's early death was caused by excessive fasting. Soon the United Farm Workers organized workers in the Salinas Valley. Then Chavez organized a neighborhood consumer boycott of grapes. In the 1970s, 26 grape growers signed formal contracts recognizing the UFW as a labor union. In 1975, the California State Legislature passed a bill that required growers to bargain collectively with the elected representatives of the farm workers. Along the way, wages increased and working conditions improved for the farm workers. Native Americans also emerged as a political force in the late 1960s. Indian rights became a priority as whites felt as a persistent sense of guilt for the destructive policies of their ancestors toward a people who had come to America first, and it was recognized that Native Americans had it worse than anyone else. Native American unemployment was 10 times the national rate. Native American life expectancy was 20 years lower than the national average, and the Native American suicide rate was 100 times higher than the rate for whites. Although Lyndon Baines Johnson attempted to funnel federal anti-poverty program funds into the reservations, militants within the American Indian community grew impatient with the pace of change. Militants organized protests and demonstrations against local, state, and federal agencies. In 1963, George Mitchell and Dennis Banks founded the American Indian Movement, known as AIM, to promote Red Power. AIM occupied Alcatraz Island in San Francisco Bay in 1969, claiming the island by right of discovery. They held a sit-in at the Department of the Interior's Bureau of Indian Affairs in 1972. In 1973, AIM led 200 Sioux to occupy the tiny village of Wounded Knee, South Dakota, the same site where the 7th Cavalry massacred a Sioux village in 1890. AIM hoped to draw attention to the poverty of the Indians living in the village, in addition to protesting the light sentences delivered to a group of local whites who had murdered a Sioux in 1972. After AIM took 11 hostages, federal marshals and FBI agents surrounded the encampment. When AIM leaders tried to bring in food and supplies, a shootout ensued. When the smoke cleared, one Indian was killed and another wounded. The tense confrontation led after 10 weeks with a government promise to re-examine Indian treaty rights. Indian protesters then went to the federal courts, armed with copies of old treaties, and demanded that those documents become the basis for restitution. Tribes in Alaska, Maine, South Carolina, and Massachusetts won settlements that provided legal recognition of their tribal rights. The first woman to become an Indian chief was Alice Brown Davis, who became principal chief of the Seminole tribe of Oklahoma in 1922. Wilma Mankiller was elected chief of the Cherokee Nation in 1985, thus becoming the first woman to hold the post. And finally, the gay and lesbian movement. The Stonewall riots forged a new sense of identity for the homosexual community. On Friday, June 27, 1969, New York City police raided the Stonewall Inn, a male gay bar in Greenwich Village, New York. The patrons fought back, and a struggle spilled into the streets. After hundreds of gays and their supporters joined the fight, rioting lasted throughout the weekend. The Gay Liberation Front was formed in the aftermath of the incident. One of its main tactics was to encourage gays to make their homosexuality public. By 1973, almost 800 gay organizations had been formed across the country, and every major city had a visible gay community and cultural life. But the campaign for gay rights suffered from internal divisions and a conservative backlash. By the end of the 1970s, the gay movement had lost its initial momentum and was struggling. In conclusion, by 1968, the civil rights movement had splintered into factions, as African Americans could not agree on the rate of change. Women, Hispanics, Native Americans, and gays launched their own movements, with mixed results. All of them faced a backlash from local government, state governments, and conservatives. Thank you for watching this video assignment on the splintered civil rights movement, and may the force be with you.